I was just wondering, for the first question, are you Cubs fans or White Sox?
Well,
Neither.
Neither? Okay.
We're Chicago.
Chicago, so I guess that's both instead of neither. Nice. Just curious. But,
What are you?
I'm actually a Yankees fan, originally, because my family's from New York. But I love the Cubs, too, because I've been here so long. But, Rachel, did you want to...
Sure. Well, when did you first move to Deerfield?
We moved in 1967, in the spring, in the summer. Mm-hmm.
Can you describe what it was like at that time?
It was a beautiful community. We lived on Central Avenue, and we had been here several times before we moved in. We have three daughters, and that was really the purpose of us wanting to move to Deerfield.
Was it for the schools?
For the school system, yes. And so we moved in during the summer when they were out of school, when our oldest was out of school. She was going into, second grade at that time, yeah. And her name is Beverly. And the middle girl is Lisa Beverly. And of course, our youngest is Tajma Beverly. And we really didn't intend to move to Deerfield. We were wanting to come to Highland Park. But in the course of the movement, things kind of changed a bit. And I think maybe we'll kind of go into that as we continue. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Of course, 30 years ago, Deerfield was quite unlike what it is today. None of this actually existed. Much of it was farmland on south of Lake Cook Road. Lake Cook Road was 2 lanes, and it was an interesting community, but it was much smaller.
How has the town stayed the same then since...
I'm sorry?
How has the town stayed the same since when you first moved?
How did it stay the same? How did it stay the same? Is it the same? The schools are still, quite good for what they do. I think the park area, I think its governmental agencies have remained the same, quite good and effective.
I think the population has increased so, and many new areas developments have come about. In fact, we live in one of the newer ones. And I think that's part of the expansion within the boundaries of Deerfield, yeah.
And I think it has tried to maintain its sort of small community atmosphere. So that's still there. The Park District, I coached girls softball for a long time. And of course, it's still going. It's still interested in its youth to a certain extent, particularly the athletic part of it, I think.
At the time that you moved here, what did you know about the Deerfield housing case?
We knew enough to make us consider everywhere except Deerfield when we moved. We knew about the problems Deerfield had. That made international news, of course, when that happened. And as Eve said, Deerfield was our last choice, but Highland Park proved to be beyond our economic
finances.
means,
Money.
Yeah. And it's interesting how we were introduced to Deerfield. The lady who was helping us, not a real relative, because relatives did not, involve themselves with us. So she said that we might want to look at Deerfield. She heard Eve's description of what we wanted, and she said, houses in Deerfield seem to be exactly what you want. And so we said, no, forget it, we'll just look somewhere else. She said, well, I'm going to be moving soon, and I'll be selling my house. Just come and look at our house. And we went over and looked at her house, and it was everything that Eve had said she wanted. So we say, well, how soon are you moving? She said. And she said, well, it'll be a while, but those kinds of houses are all over Deerfield, because Deerfield at the time was more or less a bedroom community where, people worked in Chicago and they just stayed here. They slept here, that's what it was called. And so there were people being moved from place to place by their jobs. There were houses available and that type almost everywhere. And so that's, we began looking.
As the first African-American couple in Deerfield, how were you received when you first moved here? Was it what you expected, or just what was the reaction? How were you received?
Well, that too is an interesting story. We were in touch with an organization in Chicago, I forget, the Home Development or something of that sort, right? Whose main purpose was to try to integrate, the Chicago areas, and particularly the North Shore. And they offered a number of insurances and even help for people who needed it, financial help. But they ensured that if you moved into one of these communities and it became incompatible to what you wanted, that they would reimburse you all that you had invested in it. So it was with that kind of assurance that we, that we decided that we would try to move here. Now, as I stated before, realtors did not, we went into a couple of realtor offices. They sat and talked with us, but they didn't show us anything. The community at that time was ready to wipe out that reputation it had. So there was a great number of people who really wanted Deerfield integrated. And I suspect that there were we came in contact with almost 100 Deerfield people who were all looking for housing for the Beverlys, And really, that's no exaggeration. And finally, one of our friends introduced us to the people in the house that we eventually bought. And so we went in, very nice people and all that sort of thing, and we decided that we would buy that home. Now, what is interesting about that is that from the time that decision was made to the time of, handing over the house, he had to increase the life insurance for his family because he got some threats and that kind of thing. And he said that between the time we decided and the time we took over, he increased the life insurance of his family. And we moved in. We moved in one night We moved in the evening, and we left our children in Chicago. We didn't know what was going to happen. We left our children in Chicago that night. And when the van came up, there were they knew we had
Oh, the
girls.
next day, next day.
That evening, some of the girls in the community were around the van and seeing, and all that sort of, and asking where are the girls and this kind of thing. And we said, well, they're not here. And so the next day we brought our girls in. We both took jobs out here because we wanted to be close to the girls. I knew I wasn't going to stay in Deerfield and work here because I didn't see my work being here. But I taught in Deerfield Elementary School for the first year I was out here, and Eve taught in Highland Park, where she retired from Highland Park, the school district. And so, go ahead.
I just want to back up a little bit and fill in a few places. I think that through the years you kind of you look at you look at the big picture, and there are little parts that kind of make them go together. Back up to the person that house that we went to see the house that we wanted, the format of the house. Okay, she was a realtor, and she worked in Highland Park at this agency, and she would take us around to various homes, people that had their house up for sale and this type of thing. And every place we went was terrible. It was, you'd have to kind of rake it out and redo it and that kind of thing. And of course, we didn't have that kind of money, and we didn't want to go into all of that. And we kept seeing them, so many, so we said, is this all you have to offer? And then she said, oh, there are some places in Deerfield that are available, and they're always available because the people are moving out, in and out, And at that point, then we came over to Deerfield and started looking. And their house was up for sale because they were getting a divorce and what have you. But at the time, we wanted to move in during the summer, and they weren't leaving until the fall. We wanted to bring the children out to get them acquainted with the community, with the area, and that type of thing, so they would know how to go to school, come back, and this and that. And so that's why we settled on Deerfield. And also, during the looking that we were doing in Highland Park, we had also the agency of Push. I don't know if you know what Push is. You might know, yes. Push is an organization that...
Push then?
Yeah, well, it wasn't
Bread
Push at the
Basket.
time. It was Bread Basket. So, things change. But at any rate, they also kind of helped. They were trying to move people of color into Highland Park and various places also, yes.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah.
We were looking in Highland Park because Highland Park was more amenable. They were actually reaching out. They had a fair housing. No, they didn't. We fought. We joined in that fight for their fair housing ordinance and that kind. And they did get one before Deerfield, because one of our first efforts here in Deerfield was to begin fighting for the open housing ordinance. But to back up a little bit more, the lady was a realtor, but she was sort of a vagabond realtor. She was the only one in that office that dealt with black folks. And when we tried to come into realtors in Deerfield, well, that's where we got the someone told us, well, you ought to, what do they call it, where you test, you should test them. We said, well, we're not about testing. We're not going into a realtor's office just to test. We want a house, you know. And so we depended more or less on people out there who were interested in getting us here to help us, right. Mhm.
After, okay. After we decided on the house, and the family next door in the next house, they were very helpful also. They had older children and what have you, and they had, as Sherman said, introduced us to the people that the house that we actually bought next door. But in between all of that, we were told that there was a house for sale in the next block, around the corner, but still in the school district. And so it was for sale by owner. And we said, gee, this is great. And so we got the number, called, and made an appointment. And of course, the only time we had to take care of this kind of business was on the weekend. So that Sunday, we came out and we went told them we were coming. And when we drove up, kids were out playing and this and that, and we got out of the car and we went in the house. And we had said that all we wanted to do was just to see the makeup, see if anything had to be corrected or changed or whatever. And then we weren't going to sit down and talk. We just wanted to see the house and get the price and that type of thing. So after we viewed the house and we got ready to go, then they asked us, why do you want to live here? And so we said, well, we want to move, and this really wasn't his business, but we said, we like it, we will sit a contract to you. When we left that house, there were mothers and children standing out on the sidewalk. I guess word had gotten around that we were there, and they were looking at us. And
well,
we
he
said,
got several calls while we were there. Go ahead.
And so we got in the car, and we said, well, what is going on with all these people out here? We didn't know. And so we proceeded and told our attorney, who lives in Highland Park, to submit this contract and with the figures and whatever, and they were within reason. And the attorney went to deliver it, and they would not accept it. And so he left it in the mailbox. And so at that point, then we had all of these people looking for a place for us in Deerfield. Word had gotten around to something had happened, and then our neighbor right next door to us had told us about the family that lived where we finally bought. And I don't know, but we kind of think that they were amenable to us moving there, and they had no fear of anything happening to their children, because their children went to school in Northbrook. They went to a religious school in Northbrook. And, I suppose, I don't know, but sometimes when children don't understand situations like adults do, they have different thoughts. So we finally moved in. And we came out, just as Sherman had said, and we brought the girls. And they wanted to help. Girls in the neighborhood came over and wanted to help us move in. And at that time, they looked in our trunk, and we had some black dolls in there, dolls of color, and they said, "Ooh, we've never seen these before." That was so fun.
Yes, something else too.
They had never seen anything like that.
At one of these meetings of the, when we were trying to get an open housing ordinance, at the high school, after the meeting, I had said something at the meeting, but after the meeting, somebody came up and said, "Hello, you're Mr. Beverly, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I'm so-and-so, the chief of police here." I said, "Oh, you're the chief of police?" I said, "Great." I said, I want to compliment you on the kind of the way you take care of the community. I say, "You people just drive around and all this sort of thing." I said, it's very good." He said, "Well, that was for you. I want you to know that was for you." I said, "What do you mean it was for me?" He said, "We were determined that nothing was going to happen to you and your family when you moved in." I said, "Really?" I said, "Well, you did it so, inauspiciously. I didn't realize it was something special." He said, "Well, I said, "Well, I want to, we appreciate it. Thank you very much." He said, "But when my men came back to the station that first day after having driven around the community," he said, "we were very relieved. We knew everything would be all right." I said, "Yeah, how?" He said, "Your yard was full of children." Say everybody, they were all out there playing kick the can and all this sort of thing, and we said everything is going to be all right. But one other thing, just before, there's so many stories. One other thing, before we moved out, all these people who had been looking for houses for us, and the Human Relations Commissioner, they had a Human Relations Commission out here, and the chair of the Human Relations Commission, they had a tea for us a week or so before we came, and we met a lot of the people from Deerfield and that kind, and we became friends with them, really. But the Human Relations chairperson asked me if we had resumes. I said, "Well, yes, we do." Why did you ask?" He said, "Well, I would just like to have a copy, and I would make a copy and distribute it to everybody within a certain area of you so that they could see who you are, and coming in." I said, "Well, yeah, I'd be glad to give you my resume for that. But you've got to give me the resume of all the people in this area before you get mine." He laughed and said, "Oh, you something else, But he wanted to distribute, to let them know who we were. And I said, "Not until I know who they are." But it's those kinds of things that, and he meant well. He was a good man, We became friends and all that sort of thing. But he said, "If you were Gail Sayers, you don't know Gail Sayers, do you?" Yeah. If that's like saying if you're Michael Jordan.
Somebody like
Gail
Michael
Sayers
Jordan.
was an outstanding football player for the Bears. He was great. If you were Gail Sayers, we wouldn't need to do that. I said, "But I'm a Sherman Beverly, But those are some of the kinds of stories that came out of our move to Deerfield.
You said earlier that the owner of the house that you bought received some threats. Did you personally receive any threats, or were there any incidences?
I'm sorry.
Did you personally receive any threats from townspeople?
No, not really. Deerfield had changed. Here's one of the changes you're talking about. Deerfield had changed from, when was it, 59? I guess it was when that whole, there were certainly people here who were still of the 1959 frame of reference, but there were other people who were convinced that Deerfield needed to change. And they were speaking out. So their voices were louder than the voices that were negative, you see. And so we didn't receive any threats. As a matter of fact, it's a good thing that we had what do you call those things?
Deep freezer.
Deep freezer,
Yeah.
a big one,
Oh.
because people brought us all kinds of meals, cakes. We had them for 2 years afterwards, you know. And they were all trying to welcome us, you know. And that was good. There's a story there too. One lady came with her children and left the children in the car. And by the way, she was inebriated. I mean, she was really, and left the children in the car. And she brought us a cake and said she just wanted to, welcome us or something. And then she mentioned that her children were in the car. We said, "Why didn't you bring them in?" She said they were a little frightened. They didn't know what was going on, you know. And I'm not even sure she wanted it. She was a little reluctant too, but she did come, you know. So.
And then she got the kids and brought them in, and our girls came down, and we didn't have our furniture at that time, and they were just rolling in the floor in the living room and playing like kids do, you know.
How did your daughters react to the move?
Well, they adjusted quite well. In fact, that's why we wanted to come in the summer, so that maybe they would make some friends or they'd be acquainted with the situation. And we took them to school beforehand to show them how to get there. On the way to school, we had a friend that lived on a corner, and she told us that if there was a problem, that our kids could stop there and tell her. So that was one kind of like safety thing that we used. In school, let's see, our oldest was there alone. She was the oldest, and we still had 2 at home. She's a very kind of mature type child, and
we had talked over this whole thing before we moved.
Before we moved, to tell them, you know, now you're not going to have any friends that kind of look like you, and what you're going to have to do. There will be people that want to play with you. Some people will not want to play with you. Some people will talk about your hair, and it is different. You know, you can't do anything about it. So, you know, that's that. And if there's a problem and someone bothers you, like want to fight or kick or something, tell the teacher. That's why she's there, to take care of that situation. So that went off quite well with her and her development in school. When the second daughter started, of course, there were 2 of them there. And she didn't have any problems. And they both had real friends that they communicate with. I think every time they come to Deerfield, one moved out, you know, Shireen's, our oldest, moved out. So, but that went well. Yeah.
We tell Shireen to this day that she was a great first daughter.
Yeah.
Because she laid the groundwork for the other 2, and they did not have the same kinds of issues that she had. I think one other thing that might respond to you, we knew that, we felt that we had to become a part of the community. if our girls were to make it in the community and be a part of all that the community offered young people, we knew that we had to be a part of the community too. So I became a coach of softball. I even coached. I coached all three of the girls at one time or the other. I coached flag football, and actually I got as much enjoyment out of that as anything else. We became a part of the library. I ran for the library board one year.
That was funny.
I had been recruited by, I've forgotten who was the director, to run for the board. I said, I don't have time. I don't have the energy, and I can't be campaigning. She said, listen, don't worry about it. If you declare that you want to be a library board, Deerfield is the kind of community that if you say you want to, you will be elected, because we don't get more than the number of people we need. I said, well, okay, put my name down. When it was learned that I was running for the board, 7 people.
People. Before that, they couldn't get people to go on the board. So everybody said 7.
And so I said,
so we got to keep them out. Keep them out.
And so they needed 4 people. They needed 3. I came in 4th. So I was relieved that I didn't win. But that was very funny, And incidentally, if we did not have a sense of humor, we would be crazy by now, I mean, we may be crazy anyway, but.
And jumping forward to the girls in school, we go to high school now, and jumping forward to many years, our oldest daughter is married and moved to California, and so we were out there on a vacation, and I was looking at her book. She's a reader, and so I saw a book, and it said Deerfield High, and so I opened it, and I said, oh, this is her annual, from the high school, and I saw the sheet in there, and Deerfield tracks their students once they have left the school to see how they're doing and what they're doing, and her sheet was there. I said, well, why don't you turn that in and let them know that you're a doctor out here in California and this and that? She said, oh. And so I thought about it, and then we talked about it, and she said, the whole time that I had this counselor, when I first went in, I think they kept this counselor for every year, for the whole year. I don't know if they're still doing that or not. Yeah, and she said she kept telling me, don't you want to go into home ec? You want to go into home ec? And all of her curriculum was set up for pre-med, for medicine. She had to take these classes for that. And she said, and I said, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell us? She said, because I knew what I wanted to do. And I would go and sign up, and she would get the classes that she knew that we had talked about and what she would have to do. And I didn't know that. We didn't find that out until many years later, And
she said she was thinking about us, too. Said, you guys had enough things to do without worrying about something like that. That was a non-issue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you're both doctors. Could you tell us just about your professions?
Yes, I taught an elementary school in Chicago, first of all. I'm a Chicagoan for many years. And then when we moved, we came out here, and I came to Highland Park in elementary. But my PhD is in reading, and I compiled a book that gave teachers a way of starting children to read at a very early age, even before they go to school. And that's what my work was in.
I've done everything, you know, worked in all kinds of jobs, from stevedore, longshoreman to I drove CTA bus when I first got to Chicago back in the 50s. You don't know about Big Red and the Green Hornets on the rail, the rapid transit. I did all of that, and I still go into schools quite a lot and talk to young people. One thing I tell them is about friendship. There have been about 3 points in my life when friends have made a difference and I've changed my direction. Well, it so happened that a friend of mine, he died a couple of months ago too. A friend of mine came up to visit me in Chicago while I was driving bus, and he rode my bus. And he was reading the paper, and he saw that they needed teachers here. And he said, "Boy, you don't have any business driving a bus. You've got a degree and all this sort of thing." By the way, we knew as children that we were going to go to college. That was a non-issue. My parents, they just knew we were going to go to college. And so I had a degree, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I enjoyed people, so I enjoyed driving the bus, you know. And he said, "You should not be driving a bus. You've got a degree. They need teachers here." I said, "Oh man, I don't want to teach." I said, he said, "We're going down to the Board of Ed." And so he dragged me to the Board of Ed the next day, and that next week I was in the classroom, and it was where I ought to be, really, because it was as if I should have been there, you know. I didn't know what I was doing when I first went in, you know, but I knew that, like children, I don't know what happened to those first young people who had me. They put me in a second grade class at a school that was expanding. So I was in the new part of the building. We didn't even have desks in that room for the first few days, so the young people sat on the floor, you know, and we did the best we could. But after that, I decided to go back to school and get the certification and that kind. I wasn't even certified. And by the way, something even I would have been satisfied subbing, except something happened between a principal and me. He said, "I think you're bright, Sherman, but we don't need you here." I said, "Okay, I think it was for other reasons. At any rate, it was then that I decided that I'd better go get certified, at least to make it more difficult for somebody to do that to me again, you know." And I became certified, and I taught in Chicago for 10 years. Elementary school, 5th grade is still my favorite grade. And until 67, when I decided to move up here. I wanted to work up here near the children for the first year. And so I was hired to the first African American black to be hired in Deerfield, and I worked at, what was the name of the school? Grove Park, the one on Wilmot Road all the way. Not Groves Park. I've forgotten what
It was a name. It wasn't.
But at any rate, I was there for a year, and in the meantime, I'd gone back and gotten my PhD. And after that, I went back to, at the end of that year, I went back to Chicago to teach. That's where I wanted to do my work. And went back to the Board of Ed for about one term, and by that time I went to, I transferred out of there and went to Malcolm X Community College. It was Crane Community College at the time, but during that term, the students raised so much hell. We're talking about some really interesting times during that time. The students wanted to change the name because Crane was after the people who built the toilet. You know, they say they didn't want to be going to a school that was built that, you know. So it was a big fight, but they got it changed to Malcolm X. I only stayed at Malcolm X College for one term, and then came up to Kendall College in Evanston. It's Kendall College's mission was to take young people from the North Shore who were, are we on a time? Go ahead, you're fine.
Yeah.
Young people from the North Shore who were academically needy, who had not done well in school, and get them ready for a four-year college. It did a tremendous job of that. It had a great, but we were hired, there were four of us hired to begin an African American Studies department. Up to that time, Kendall had maybe one or two African Americans. It's a small school with about 900 people. And our job was to begin a department and recruit, like we had 100 young black people come to Kendall College. I guess it must have been, I've forgotten, in 1968, I think it was. They came to Kendall, 69. They came to Kendall College, and it was just a great experience for both the college and the students. And Kendall has not been the same. It's still, in fact, it has moved now into Chicago, and it's one of the top chef schools, I think, in the country now. But at any rate, I stayed there 4 years. During that time is when I got my PhD from Northwestern. Again, friends convinced me to do that, you know, because they said, "Come on, man, get your PhD." I said, "I don't need a PhD, I'm doing." And so I went on and got the PhD, and right after that, I went to Northeastern, where I spent the rest of my career. First in the Department of Inner City Studies, which is an urban studies department with the College of Education. And the last 6 years, 6 or 8 years, I transferred to the College of Education and taught social studies education. And I've enjoyed every phase of my career, my education career. I enjoyed I enjoyed the 2 years when I was doing the second graders, you know. But when I got to 5th grade, that was where I wanted to be. And then college, that's where I wanted to be. Graduate student, I've taught, you know, all levels and enjoyed it.
Those years were very difficult for us because we had made the move, and we took new jobs, and we were watching the girls, and then Sherman, you know, decided to go to graduate school and everything, and so we always had a tight schedule. And it was after he had gotten his degree that I really got started. And I went to Union Graduate School, and we started with a colloquium, which was just a meeting to find out what you really wanted to do. And so then I would go in the summers to sessions and take my courses. So it was very, very difficult with the girls, and we were always busy, always on the go. And, you know, that was a very busy time during our life until finally I graduated. I think I must have been 5 years. Seems like I was taking a course by course by course. And finally got the degree from Union Graduate School.
But we had to be supportive of each other. Just an example of that, I had some surgery while I was in school, and of course I could not attend class. You know, Eve would attend the classes for me, and she would take notes, come to the hospital, and go over those notes with me. You know, so it's that kind of support that we had to give to each other as we moved through life.
Could you tell us about where you grew up?
Well, I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas. You've heard of Port Arthur. Recently, Hurricane Rita, I think it was, hit down there and took a lot of my friends, you know, out of their homes. I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas, and of course Texas was segregated at the time. Now, you know, segregation does not mean that people were completely separated from each other, because we worked together, we did a lot of things that we were in contact with each other. Separate schools. One school was named Lincoln High, another one was named Jefferson High. Which one was black? Yeah, Lincoln was the black school. When people asked, the only school, pre-college school I attended was Lincoln High School, because it was in one building, the elementary and primary and that kind of thing. We lived on the west side, across the track, and we had a great school. I think it was a great school because all the teachers lived in the community and were friends with the family. We knew them personally. We didn't have the greatest facilities. We went back to Port Arthur and visited and went to a museum. They have a museum called the Gulf Coast Museum, I think. It's right on the Gulf of Mexico, incidentally. And we went back, and as we were walking around, there was a young man who was taking us around, and we got to a case where they were talking about the high school championships teams, that football teams, and I graduated in 1945, and you know, Lincoln had two high school state championship teams, and so he saw the picture of Lincoln's teams were the Bumblebees, Jefferson's team was the Yellow Jackets. Now, he saw the sign up there that the Yellow Jackets had won the championship. He said, "Oh, were you on that team?" I said, "No, I wasn't on that team." He said, "But you were on a championship." I said, "We had two different teams." Now, here was a guy working in a museum showing people around who did not know the history of that was interesting to me. And when he found that out, then we couldn't get away from him, because he was learning so much about the city in a museum where he was one of the guides there. But Port Arthur served me well. I often think of the older men who were there who took us in hand and really made made us into what we are now.
I just have one last question. What do you miss most about Old Deerfield?
I don't know if I've even thought about it. What do I miss most? Well, I think the closeness of it. I know the parking was not as congested as it is now. You knew I met I used to play tennis with and volleyball with the man who ran the drugstore here. It was I'm
Lindemans?
80, what?
Was it Lindemans?
No, Lindemann was here, but there was another one too.
Yeah.
I met him the other day, and we had lunch together. But I miss that you'd go into a place, and you knew the people who were there. Gould Kelly, it wasn't Gould
Travel
Kelly then,
agency.
but the travel agent. That's what we miss the most.
If I could just ask quickly, did you ever think you would see a black president?
Oh, of course not. No.
We've been saying hallelujah every day, every night.
Yeah, no,
Just
we didn't.
keep him safe.
Mhm.
That's all.
No.
I know there are people that want to wipe him out, but no, that was a very happy time.
As a
Very
matter of
happy time for
In
us.
fact, I wrote something to the family about that. What people, wherever they are now, are thinking and singing. But you asked about our childhood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If there's anything you'd like
Yeah,
to know.
Chicago. I was born in Chicago and grew up there, of course. And I lived on the south side, which was known as Bronzeville, that little area there. And of course, it wasn't really segregation, but there was segregation. We lived in one place, and a lot of whites lived in others. But we stayed there, and everything that was there that we needed, almost, and things that we needed and they didn't have, we'd go out to another neighborhood and get it. I grew up in an apartment building, and I lived there all my life growing up. When I came to Deerfield, I would go at night and check every door and everything, because I wasn't accustomed to living in a house. And at first, until it still takes me a little time to get over that, because I pull my blinds at night. I'm up on the second floor where I live now, second level. But I went to a very large school. It was Forestfield School. And my brother and I would walk to school there. And it was 3 stories high. And I know they must have had like 1,000 kids there, because we'd line up outside and march in, up the stairs and what have you. It wasn't anything like a school in this area. And we had 48 seats in the classroom, and every seat was taken. It was a crowded school, and I think almost every classroom was like that.
And she's talking about elementary school.
Yeah, this is the elementary school. And I graduated from there and went to high school, which was DuSable, which was a newer high school at that time. It was Phillips and DuSable. Those were the 2 big schools that had football games that we would go to. And I graduated from DuSable, and I wanted to go to college. And I wasn't able to go because my family didn't have enough money. I was reared by a single parent, my mother. And I have a younger sister, and I had an older brother. So I told my mother I wanted to go to college. She said, well, we don't have any money. And she was working. She worked in a dress factory. She sewed on what's called like a power machine. And, you know, you race up on that and this and that. And so, but anyway, she said, I said, well, she said, you need to get a job. I said, okay. I had taken a class to be a typist. Before I went to high school, I took a class, and so I was a speed typist. So then I went out to see about getting a job, and I went to Spiegel's, and I worked there for 1 year as a typist, and I would type addresses for the time payments department. And Mother had said that if you work 1 year, we could save enough money, and you would be able to go away to school. And so that's what happened. I got enough money at that time. So I couldn't go to a black college, which was in the South, which was to go away and stay at the college. So I had an aunt and uncle in Kansas City. And I said, my mother said, well, we'll send you down to Kansas City to go to school there at Lincoln University. And the first year, I had to pay out-of-state tuition. And the second year, I didn't have to pay because I was considered a resident. And so that helped a lot on the bill. And as I worked there in the president's office and in the dean of the school's office also as typing. So I kind of let that help me get through school. And then after I left Lincoln, then that's when I started on my graduate work.
I can never forget that she was a homecoming queen.
Well, thank you
Well,
very much.
It's a lot more and more in that. that I think, you know, too much detail is going too much. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.